Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are watching this. Welcome back to my channel. If you are returning, if this is your first time here, then welcome. Come on in, take your shoes off, stay a while, because I got a story for you. Today I'm going to talk to you about an exoneration. So this will be the story about somebody, or in this case, multiple people who were wrongfully convicted of a crime and later proven to be innocent. I usually do my makeup while I tell you this story, but I'm not doing that today. But I will show you the process at the end of the video. So if you're interested in makeup, if you want to know all of the products that I use, they will be listed down below in the description box. And other than that, I hope that you enjoy the content. I hope that you like, share, subscribe, and just kind of interact in the comments and just let me know your thoughts. If you're into true crime, if you like makeup, this is the place for you, because that's the type of stuff you're gonna find on my channel. I know, it's been forever, and let me tell y'all, I'm sorry. I hope you guys have been well. I hope you're doing really good now. I have been having technical difficulties for the past few weeks, and so for that reason, I'm gonna lay this out a little bit differently. It'll be more, I guess, similar to like a podcast where I'm just kind of like talking through it, but I will show you the look, the process of making the look, in kind of like just a shorter version at the end of the video. And you guys can let me know how you like this format. This is the best I can do for now, so I hope that you love it. I think that recording the other way was just taking a really long time. Like, it would literally, I would sit there for like 2.5 hours doing my makeup, which would normally take like 40 minutes or so, just in trying to time the story right and explain everything. And then editing would just take a really long time, and I have a MacBook Air, and it takes a lot out of that little computer to edit these videos. And so I figured if I had shorter videos, less content to edit, it should be easier for the computer until I can figure out that situation. And I didn't want to leave you guys hanging, because I really miss doing these stories, and I really miss sharing this stuff with you guys. And so I wanted to give you something to work with, even if it's only like a 20-minute video. And I hope that that's enough for you guys. If not, I mean, feel free to contribute to my new computer fund. Until then, I have a wonderful story for you guys today. I actually did record this story last week, or not last week, but like a few weeks ago, when I did the whole makeup look during telling the story, but I couldn't edit it, and so I got really frustrated and scrapped the whole thing. And now I'm going to tell you all about this story today. The reason I did it a few weeks ago was because it was Black History Month, and the story really resonated with Black history. And so I really wanted to share that with you guys, but it's definitely, you know, can be told any day, any month of the year, because we're always celebrating Black history. And for that reason, I'm going to tell this story today. There is no like trigger warning, because there's nothing about this story that's like extremely detailed, graphic, or violent, or sexually explicit. So it's totally rated like PG. So no need to like mute the video or censor yourself, or, you know, get paranoid about anything. You can watch it all the way through, because it's really just like a historical story. But there is a crime, and there are people who are wrongfully charged and exonerated. And also, today is International Women's Day. My shirt, I don't know if you can see it, it says Black Women Birth Black History, and it is from Mahogany Mommies. So if you guys want to look at their shop, I actually have quite a few things from them. I really liked their website. This is not a sponsorship or paid promotion, but if you want to, slide in my DMs. Now I'm going to get into the story. The story really takes place in 1968, after the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In Wilmington, North Carolina. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not assassinated in North Carolina, but this is where this story takes place. So until 1969, just 1 year later after... Hi, Louie. This is Louie. Say hi to the people. Say hi to the people. This is Lulu. He's the baby. Okay, I'll leave you alone. So until 1969 in Wilmington, North Carolina, schools were actually segregated, despite Brown versus the Board of Education being passed in 1954. It took well over a decade for especially schools in the South to begin adapting that law and integrating the schools. So up until 1969, there were 3 separate high schools in Wilmington. There was the all-white New Hanover High School, there was the all-white Haggard High School, and there was the black African-American Williston Senior High School. So these desegregation laws were finally instituted in the summer of 1969. When that happened, instead of creating some sort of system where they would integrate the schools based on proximity or location or anything like that, they basically just closed down the black school and relocated all of the students and some of the staff into these white schools. So they shut down the black school and just put the black students into the white population instead of finding a way to equally distribute both the white students and the black students amongst these 3 high schools. This did not have a good effect on either of the 2 high schools. It didn't have a good effect on the community. It didn't have a good effect on the town. So what ended up happening was people were pissed, basically, because not only did they shut down the school, but Williston High School had become like such a prideful place for black people in the community, right? It was an all-black school. They had all-black sports, all-black musical, activities and groups. They had all-black student body and clubs and just things that they worked really hard to take a sense of pride in of their school, like one would do. Not only that, they had really good relationships with the staff, the teachers, the coaches, the leadership in their school. And when the school closed, it laid off a high percentage of a lot of the leadership that existed in the black school and just transferred all of these black students into predominantly white spaces. And so that created tension because not only were you closing down the school that they were super proud of, you were firing and laying off all of the teachers and staff that they had good relationships with, their support systems. You were placing them in these predominantly white schools, which rejected them from their sports, from their clubs, from their musical groups. And so these kids really had like no outlet, no sense of belonging, no sense of community, and had a lot taken away from them at the same time. Also, the white students didn't want them there. The white staff didn't want them there. Nobody wanted this integration to happen. And so there was opposition from both the existing group and then the black students who were placed in the existing community. People began to taunt each other, fight each other. There were police involved a lot of the time at the school. They were always up there, at the schools, I should say. They were always up there trying to mitigate the chaos. And eventually the energy from the school transpired into the community, right? Because these kids are going home and telling, their parents are well aware. And so that is translating into the community, and people outside of the school are beginning to fight and have conflict when they're dropping their kids off at school, when they're strolling through the neighborhood in different places. There was, and keep in mind that the racial tension at this time was extremely high. There were very prominent white supremacist groups that were out in the open, like the Ku Klux Klan, like the Rights of White People. There were, Dr. Martin Luther King was just assassinated, so black people were pissed and at the same time. All these, changes were happening in real time as well. The integration, the desegregation. And so that plays a lot into when you think about, okay, these kids are going home and, talking to their parents about this, and people are out in the streets fighting and arguing, and it seems very black against white, because that's what it was, because this was the time, like the racial tension was extremely high, extremely sensitive, and it just caused for a lot of chaos. That's just the reality of it. The students at the school, specifically the black students, began to advocate for things that they needed. They wanted to have equal access to student body activities. They wanted to be included in the sports. They wanted to, they had a lot of demands and requests that they wanted to have met in order to feel like they were getting an equal opportunity at the school. And so they began organizing marches to City Hall, not just the black students, but their parents, other black people in the community, other black leaders, church, pastors and community organizers and leaders, organizing marches to City Hall to try to implement some of these changes. And several times the school board, City Hall, the superintendent pretty much rejected all of their demands, all of their requests. And in the first week of February 1971, after school administrators refused to consider any of their proposals whatsoever, the black student body at both high schools organized a full-on walkout. In response to this, the Oxford, North Carolina United Church of Christ sent the experienced Reverend Benjamin Chavez to Wilmington to help these people, to help the black students, the families, the people of the community, just to help them organize, give them some leadership, give them some guidance, because he was an experienced community activist who actually served alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at one point, and also believed in the nonviolent approach to, just in advocating for their rights. And so he comes down and becomes the kind of like ambassador face person, and just overall leader of the group. And a lot of these meetings, rallies were held in the church in the neighborhood, the Gregory Congregational United Church of Christ, to be specific. So on February 3rd, after the students formed this walkout, Reverend Chavez calls everybody to, and mind you, he's only 23 at the time. These leaders, you guys, like back in the day, it was different. Like people were not, he was an experienced community activist and leader at 23 years old. He had served alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for several years by the time he was 23, and was experienced enough to come into a new city and facilitate advocacy on behalf of multiple high schools in the midst of racial tension and chaos. Like to me, that's just like wildly impressive. But anyways, this young guy comes down, he's got them all organized, they're meeting at the church, they're having these conversations about what their goals are and how to properly create plans and execute them to get what they need. And so that was February 3rd that he comes and is like, okay, we're gonna do this, blah, blah, blah. February 4th, the next day, they had a meeting with the school board. The meeting goes unofficial, right? Because the school board is like, I don't know how many times I gotta tell you this. We're really not trying to hear all that. Like, we got bigger fish to fry, or however they want to put it. So on February 4th, they go to meet at the church. They're holding a rally. They're discussing what the steps are next. And during this time, they get a phone call from somebody, some anonymous person. And he's like, hey, just so you know, we coming to bomb your shit. Like, this is a forewarning. There will be bombs tonight. And this happens while they're at the church. And so I guess what they thought was going to happen was that people were going to get evacuate the church, right? That is what most people probably would do. But in this day and age, they was about that life. So they didn't send a bunch of the students and other like men in the church. Go home, gear up, grab, what they got, and they went back to the church and they stood outside and they told them basically like, pull up then. And so yeah, I mean, that's exactly what they did. Carloads of white men drove past the church and fired several rounds into the church, and there were black men out there who were defending the church. They were shooting back, but ultimately several people lost their lives that day. trying to protect the church, and even some of the people who were inside the church, which is just like really unfortunate that that's like a chronic part of history, is people attacking black churches of all places, in the name of America. But that's neither here nor there. Over the next 3 nights, similar attacks were conducted all over the city. Several bombings, several cases of arson, people setting buildings on fire. Several people lost their lives, and millions of dollars in damage was done to the city. And it just sounds like literally like a war zone. Like, you think you know what it would be like to be there in that time, and you think you know what you would do, but people were literally like about that life. Like, this is happening outside the crib, like outside on the street that you live on, that your grocery store is on, that people are shooting, fighting, the hammers, you know what I'm saying? Like, every day, all night, all day, buildings on fire, police everywhere, firemen everywhere, trying to preserve what they can, because it's up in smoke, literally, like the whole city. That would just be nuts. A few days later, on February 6th, 1961, and this is so that was not the crime. Back in this time and age, it's not considered a crime if it happens to black people or black families or black churches. It's only considered a crime if it happens to a white church or a white business or a white person. And so that is not the crime we are discussing today, even though it is very much a crime. This crime takes place a few days later on February 6th of 1971. Violence had erupted. Several community activists were out there, several thugs, the KKK, the People for Whites' Rights, or whatever their group was called. There is a grocery store in the neighborhood. It is called Mike's Grocery, and it happens to be a white-owned business. This grocery store was firebombed. I don't know exactly where people are getting these weapons. I don't know if that is code for a Molotov cocktail, or if people legit had access to bombs and like heavy machinery and guns. So I don't know. A firefighter who responded to the grocery store being ablaze said that he saw a black man with a sniper on top of the roof of the church, and he said that the sniper shot at the firefighters as they were responding to the grocery store being on fire. However, there were a lot of accounts of police officers who were in the area who said that all of the street lights had been shot out, and it was basically pitch black outside, so it was very hard to see anything or anyone. Regardless, because this claim was made, the National Guard was called in to come in and clear out the church, and that's what they did. Following this incident, Benjamin Chavez, who came to lead the organization, he was arrested along with 9 other members of the church. There was one woman, 35-year-old Ann Shepard, who was a white woman, and the rest of the group were black people. They were black students. So remember, Chavez at the time was 23 years old. Charged with him was 19-year-old Marvin Patrick, 21-year-old Connie Tyndall, 19-year-old Jerry Jacobs, 18-year-old Wayne Moore, 18-year-old Reginald Epps, 19-year-old James McCoy, 18-year-old Willie Vereen, 19-year-old William Wright Jr., and 35-year-old Ann Shepard, who was an anti-poverty worker and just a community activist. I mean, she was like with Black Lives Matter, back in the day before it was a thing. So she was the homegirl holding it down, but they all became known as the Wilmington 10, which is who this case is about today. Now, because this case was so massively publicized, they had to move the trial from New Hanover County to Pender County Superior Court. The jury selection began in June of 1972, so about a year later, a year and a half. During the first trial, several students under the age of 16 actually skipped school to come and be present during the trial, and the judge basically told them that he would have them arrested for truancy if they didn't leave the courtroom and go back to school right this instant. Like, I'm going to give y'all an opportunity to leave, and anybody who is still here is going to be arrested right now. After a week, the jury was selected, and on the original jury there were 10 black people and 2 white people, but the mistrial was soon declared after one of the jury members mysteriously fell ill. On the contrary, the new jury was pretty much the exact opposite, where there were 10 white folks and 2 black people. Convenient. The prosecution's primary witness was a 17-year-old kid named Alan Hall, who had agreed to participate after he got sentencing off of his own conviction for participating in, the riots and everything that was happening during that time. Hall got up there and testified that he and several other students conducted bombings and shootings at the police and at the firemen who were trying to mitigate the chaos in the streets during the time where all of this violence was erupting in the neighborhood. He testified that Benjamin Chavez conducted trainings on how to incite violence at the church, and this is where they all learned how to do these things. Hall was the only witness to identify the 10 defendants at the trial. There were 2 other witnesses, a 17-year-old Jerome Mitchell, who was a convicted felon and a high school dropout, which is neither here nor there, but it was reported, so I'm going to report it. As well as 12-year-old Eric Junius, who was a junior high school dropout. Well, I guess it would be more like a middle school dropout since he's only 12. And they both corroborated Hall's story. They, however, did not identify anybody in the line of questioning. The defense, they cross-examined Alan Hall about several contradictions that he was making during his statement and 2 pre-trial statements that he had given to the prosecution. He said that since his original statement that he gave to prosecutors, he basically sorted it out with them. They excused the mistakes that he made when he first gave a statement, and now this is the correct statement and they should just take it for what it is. The cross-examination became so definitive in the space that Alan Hall actually lunged from behind the stand, the witness stand where he was being questioned. He lunged and tried to hop over and attack the defense attorney for questioning him. So the defense was like, okay, well, you said you had this conversation where you amended whatever you said in the pretrial. We request access to those documents, to the documentation that proves that you had this conversation with the prosecution. But the judge declined to order that the documents be turned over for whatever reason. Can't think of any reason. On October 17th, 1972, the defendants were convicted of conspiracy to assault emergency personnel and conspiracy to burn businesses with incendiary devices. These are what their sentences were. Benjamin Chavez, who was 24 years old, received 34 years. Connie Tyndall, who was 21 years old, received 31 years. Marvin Chili Patrick, who was 19, received 29 years. Wayne Moore, who was 19, received 29 years. Reginald Epps, who was 18, received 28 years. Jerry Jacobs, who was 19, received 29 years. James Bunn McCoy, who was 19, received 29 years. William Earl Vereen, who was 18, received 29 years. Received 29 years. Why is that so hard? William Joe Wright Jr., who was 19, received 29 years. And Shepard, who was age 35, received 15 years. I laugh because Ann Shepard was the oldest woman. She received the lowest amount of time, and I'm sure you can understand why. Ann Shepard's charge was actually reduced from conspiracy to being an accessory to the crimes. And in 1974, all of their sentences were upheld after they tried to appeal. Everybody except for 3 of these people were high school students, and most of them were sentenced to over 25 years. Actually, everybody over Anne were sentenced to over 25 years. Their story gained national attention, and several people marched and protested and demanded their release. There was a march in Washington, D.C. in 1978. Writer, James Baldwin wrote pieces protesting. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Andrew Young, condemned the convictions and the long sentences and were demanding release of these people. And in 1975, Alan Hall recanted his testimony and admitted that he lied on trial because of incitements provided by the prosecution and coercions. Mitchell and Junius later recanted their testimony as well. A motion for appropriate relief was filed to release the defendants upon, these confessions coming forward, but the judge denied, concluding that the recantations of their testimony are not credible. So no, y'all gonna sit y'all ass in there. He basically was like, well, if they would admit that they lied and they would lie on the stand, then how are we supposed to believe them now when they say that they, didn't see what they said they saw? I'm going to choose to believe them then and not now, so they can all stay exactly where they're at. This is the way the judge was talking, not me. I would never say that. So the defendants filed for a writ of habeas corpus, and in December of 1980, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals vacated all the convictions of all the defendants and ordered a new trial. They found that the prosecution had failed to provide any evidence that impeached the credibility of Alan Hall and Junius. So basically they were just like, okay, well, we denied their appeals before, stating that that the recantation of their statements weren't credible, but there's no evidence that says it wasn't credible, so why did we do that? And on that grounds, they were given new trials. They said that the prosecution should have provided those documents that stated, that Alan Hall had spoken to the prosecution before the trial started in the original trial, that the judge never ordered that they turn over. They also said that the prosecution withheld statements that said that Alan Hall lied to the jury. And in fact, Alan Hall, when he reviewed his original statement that he gave, the pretrial statement, he corrected 17 points of that statement, and the prosecution only acknowledged 13 of those. Which is a lot. That's a lot. You misspoke or got confused on 17 parts of your statement, on which 10 people's freedom and livelihood rely on. That is a lot. They also said that the prosecution knew that Alan Hall was testifying falsely and withheld any evidence that they paid for a trip for Alan Hall and his girlfriend to go on and bought them Vespas to ride around on. And Vespas, I got PTSD, y'all. Side story, when I went to Africa, when I was in Cape Town in South Africa, the first 20 minutes I got there, I got on a Vespa and flew the fuck off it, and that was 8 weeks ago, and my knee is still healing. Back to the story. The court also stated that the judge prohibited the defense team from cross-examining any of the witnesses about favorable treatment that they received before the trial. So they were allowed to cross-examine them. They just weren't allowed to ask about how they ask you that question, is there any influence or coercion or anything like that as to why you're testifying today? I guess that wasn't a thing back then. Because although those witnesses were serving time in a federal prison, the prosecution had them released and flown out to a beach house and motels all the way up until the trial. I feel like that would never slide these days. By the time this was happening, all of the defendants except for Benjamin Chavez had been released on parole. Chavez was released in January 1981. The prosecution never sought out to retry the defendants, but they also never dismissed the charges either. So, more than 30 years later, in May of 2012, a petition for pardon was filed with the North Carolina governor, Betty Perdue. The petition said that as a result of the prosecution's knowing use of perjured testimony, the state of North Carolina fraudulently procured the convictions of 10 innocent North Carolina citizens. On December 31st of 2012, New Year's Eve, more than 40 years after people of the Wilmington 10 were convicted, Perdue granted pardons for everybody on the basis of actual innocence. Which is all fine and dandy. That's great that we finally acknowledge, that we really fucked up and dropped the ball here. But the unfortunate part is that 4 out of the 10 had already unfortunately passed away by this time. This is what the governor, Betty Perdue, had to say about the exoneration. She said that last month new evidence was made available to me in the form of handwritten notes from the prosecutor who picked the jury at trial. These notes show that with disturbing clarity the dominant role that racism played in the jury selection. The notes revealed that certain white jurors believed to be members of the Ku Klux Klan were described by the prosecutors as good, and that at least one African American juror was noted to be an Uncle Tom type. This conduct is disgraceful. It is utterly incompatible with the basic notions of fairness and with the very ideal that North Carolina holds dear. So, what she's talking about is some notes that were found that were made by the judge, like literally handwritten scribbles on a list of the jurors, the people, who made up the jury, right? Remember we said that at first it was 10 black people and 2 white, and then it flopped 10 white people, 2 black people, and the judge literally went down the list and made like little handwritten notes on the list next to everybody's name so that he would know who was who. And next to the prominent, out loud and proud boys on the list, he would write good, fair, positive characteristics or adjectives next to. And then next to 1 out of 2 of the black jurors, he wrote, "This is an Uncle Tom type," stating that basically 9 out of 10 of the jurors were already had preconceived notions against the defendants. And this is the way he preferred his jury to be. This is the way he allowed that jury to be the judge of these 9 black and 1 white women. Unfortunately, like I said at this time, 4 of the Wilmington 10 had passed away. So Jerry Jacobs had passed in 1989. William Wright died in 1990. Ann Shepard passed in 2011. And Connie Tyndall died just in August 2012, which was only 4 months before the exoneration happened. In May of 2013, the state granted compensation to the remaining living members of the Wilmington 10. However, the state refused to grant compensation to the living families of the 4 members that passed away, which is just like so rude. Ugh. The families even filed, a lawsuit demanding compensation, but unfortunately they lost. However, a group called the Wilmington 10 Foundation for Social Justice was formed and established to improve conditions in the city and help with other social justice issues. And that is the case of the Wilmington 10. Happy belated Black History Month. Sorry that I couldn't post this video sooner, but I want to know how you guys like this format. I know this video is a lot shorter. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing though, because my videos before were really long. But I'm totally interested to hear in your guys' perspective, your opinion. What did you guys think about this case? I just think it's like wild to actually like envision yourself being present in a time like that, in a time where, because like for me in 2020, well, not only in 2020 but specifically in 2020 when everything with like George Floyd was happening, I was very, very emotional and felt very sensitive all the time because like tension was so high and it was hard to engage in like work and do regular stuff knowing about everything that was going on. And so I don't know what it would be like, to actually be like in the front lines on the boycotts in the face of like such extreme racism and the out and loud and proud, KKK members and just everybody having the freedom to like assault each other and people. And like, I know that people like to say not much has changed, but a lot has changed since then. But it's just like very sad and unfortunate to think all of this was just 50 years ago, like not 60 years ago, not long at all. Rest in peace to all of the people who lost their lives in the midst of all of the chaos and the race wars and the battles that happened. Also, rest in peace to the members of the Wilmington 10 who passed and just didn't get to see their day of justice. Although I don't know that would be any consolation, because they knew the whole time, you know. And it was interesting because they were considered to be political prisoners, which the first time that I heard that term was actually visiting the Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was held in prison as well. I hope you guys like this look. Yeah, I'll post a link to where I got the shirt from. There were several like books and short films that were made about the Wilmington 10, so I will post the links to those below as well if you want to look further into the case, or find out more information about this trial and everything that happened with these people. But other than that, I thank you guys so much for stopping by and hanging out with me, and for watching my content, and for coming back even though I took a few weeks off. And I'm sorry, and I hope that this works out so that I can continue to give you guys content. Other than that, have an amazing, blessed day. Have an amazing, blessed weekend. Happy International Women's Day to all of my beautiful queens out there. I hope that you guys feel amazing and strong and powerful like you are. And shout out to all my women, my mom, my friends, my people. Y'all know who y'all are. Have a great rest of your day. Be great. I don't know what else to say. See y'all in the next one. And bye. Bye. Bye.